Eleanor Ellie Vance, 58, was not prone to impulse, especially not impulse involving sequin tickets and grand pronouncements. Yet, here she was, standing rigid as a freshly baked baguette in the gilded salle des fêtes near the Pont Neuf, gripping a satin ticket stub embossed with a tiny, slightly maniacal cupid. The event was the annual L'amour c'est compliqué gala, a bizarre charitable initiative where attendees paid exorbitant fees to participate in a strictly random pairing lottery. The grand prize? A week in a palatial suite at the Ritz, complete with unlimited champagne and a dedicated concierge to handle all existential crises. Ellie, recently retired from municipal accounting, was here because her sensible sister dared her to do something unpredictable before she settled into knitting and PBS documentaries. The master of ceremonies, a man whose mustache resembled two angry caterpillars, bellowed, "And the winning pair, chosen by the capricious hand of fate, number 47 and number 112. Ellie looked down. Her ticket read 47. She was instantly paired with a man who, at 62, looked like an exceptionally rumpled academic who'd just discovered the meaning of life, or perhaps just misplaced his reading glasses. This was Bernard, Bernie Dubois, a newly single antique map dealer from Boston, who was currently attempting to bow while simultaneously dropping his complimentary glass of Sancerre. "Oh, bonjour!" Bernie exclaimed, recovering his wineglass with surprising dexterity. "I had a feeling 112 was my lucky number. It's a prime number, you see, and—" "Look," Ellie cut in, her voice crisp and organizational. "I am Ellie Vance. I appreciate the absurdity of this situation, but before we get into the metaphysics of prime numbers, let's establish ground rules for the shared occupancy of the Ritz's most luxurious accommodations." Bernie smiled, a wide, slightly crooked gesture that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Ground rules? Darling, we just won the most ridiculous prize in Paris. The only ground rule is embrace the chaos." Ellie sighed, already feeling the organizational stability draining from her soul. The concierge called. They need confirmation by 9 a.m. I propose we spend tomorrow morning establishing our shared itinerary. I have a color-coded schedule for the major museums, and I've budgeted 45 minutes for the Louvre. Bernie shuddered visibly. 45 minutes for the Louvre? That's barely enough time to appreciate the sheer volume of dust. No. Tomorrow we are going to Montmartre. We will drink watery coffee, argue about the meaning of Impressionism, and perhaps accidentally get painted by a struggling artist. The first 2 days were, predictably, a disaster. Bernie insisted on taking the metro lines that required the most transfers, viewing each subterranean journey as an anthropological study. Ellie, who preferred taxis and predictable schedules, found herself perpetually 15 minutes late for appointments she didn't want to keep anyway. Their shared suite, which was admittedly spectacular, all velvet and silk and views of the Tuileries, became a battleground of organizational philosophies. Bernie's half was a cheerful explosion of discarded socks and half-finished poetry. Ellie's was pristine, bordering on forensic. On the third afternoon, their conflict climaxed, not in a shouted argument, but over a shared croissant. They were sitting at a tiny, slightly sticky table outside a cafe in the Marais. "Why are you so determined to make this trip an exercise in efficiency?" Bernie asked, looking genuinely puzzled. Ellie carefully brushed crumbs from her lap. "Because inefficiency is waste. I came here to see Paris, not to participate in some late-life spiritual awakening with a man who thinks his destiny is governed by random ticket numbers. And I came here because my wife, God bless her chaotic soul, always wanted to win something truly absurd. She died last year. Before she went, she made me promise to throw caution and socks to the wind." Ellie paused. The brusque shell of professionalism she wore cracked slightly. I I'm sorry. I retired because after 30 years of counting other people's money, I realized I hadn't spent any time on my own life. I thought structure would keep me safe. Safe from what? Safe from enjoying a croissant that's too buttery to be illegal? Safe from realizing that 45 minutes at the Louvre is a tragedy? A sudden, aggressive drizzle began to fall, turning the cobbled straight slick. Bernie didn't grab his umbrella. Instead, he picked up a small, slightly wilted rose from the cafe table, looked at Ellie, and burst into a slightly off-key rendition of La Vie en Rose. Ellie tried to remain exasperated, she really did. But watching this grown man, slightly soggy, singing Edith Piaf badly in the middle of a Parisian rain shower, she felt a laugh bubble up, a genuine, deep-seated laugh she hadn't experienced in years. "You are utterly ridiculous, Bernard Dubois," she managed, wiping a tear of mirth, or perhaps rain, from her eye. "And you, Eleanor Vance, are entirely too organized to be happy," he countered, his smile radiant. "But perhaps, just perhaps, our ridiculousness and your organization could average out to something functional." That evening, they didn't return immediately to the Ritz. Instead, Bernie led her to a quiet wine bar in the 5th arrondissement. Over 2 bottles of robust Burgundy and a plate of strong cheese, the arguments faded into conversation. Ellie learned about his antique map dealing. Bernie learned about the satisfaction Ellie found in balancing complex ledgers. They found that where one was prone to panic, Ellie, when faced with spontaneity, the other was reliably calm, Bernie when faced with technical details. "So, the rest of the week," Ellie said, swirling her wine, "I still intend to see the Musée d'Orsay, but maybe we take a barge down the Seine first, and perhaps we allocate an hour and a half to the museum." Bernie clinked his glass gently against hers. "An hour and a half? Compromise, my dear, is an acquired taste. Much like marrying someone who leaves socks next to priceless antiques," Ellie murmured, letting the implication hang in the air. "As in, you're proposing that we stick around? Past this week? Past this ludicrous lottery ticket?" Ellie considered the impeccable order of her previous life versus the delightfully absurd, slightly soggy future currently on offer. "I think," she said, setting down her glass and leaning closer, "that after 50 years of sensible decisions, it's high time I embraced the chaos, as long as you promise me that we invest in a shared laundry basket." Bernie laughed, a rich, delighted sound that perfectly suited the warm, romantic air of the wine bar. "Deal! Now, about that 50-minute limit on the Eiffel Tower." The end.